Now to present today's special program here in the Hall of Philosophy. This week, as you are aware by now, we are focusing on the theme, The Journey of the Universe, and we bring you a notable roster of interfaith scholars once again today. Today's distinguished guests are David Haberman, Christopher Ives, and Christopher Chapple, who will present the responses to Journey of the Universe, the perspective from the South Asian religions. I want to say to the people seated behind me, this is the first time here at Chautauqua, and the 14 years now that I have been here, that we have had a week this complete with the diversity of religions. And so we're very grateful to the scholars this week who have introduced us to a broad spectrum of religious thought on this very important subject. Dr. Haberman will lead with the response from Hinduism. He is a professor and former chair of religious studies at Indiana University, Bloomington, who specializes in the Hindu religious traditions of India. Dr. Christopher Ives, professor and chair of religious studies at Stonehill College, will follow with the Buddhist response. His scholarship focuses on Zen Buddhist ethics, and he is currently working on Buddhist approaches to environmental issues and to violence and war. Dr. Christopher Key Chapple, the Navin and Pratima Doshi Professor of Hindic and Comparative Theology at Loyola Marymount University, will present the response from the Jain tradition. His research interests have focused on the renouncer religious traditions of India, yoga, Jainism, and Buddhism. Have you comprehended all of that? If you think that wasn't a little bit difficult to handle the reading of all of it. But the fact is, for me personally, this is a very exciting triplicate that we have coming today. These are not, especially Jainism, it is not one of the religions that we know well. And so we will begin, hopefully in this series, to carry out the promise that we made to Chautauqua a year ago when we declared ourselves to be an interfaith community with interfaith lectures. And this really helps to fill that out. So I'm very, very grateful to Mary Evelyn, and who helped make all of this possible, and to her husband, and to those who spoke yesterday and today. All of our speakers are responding to the award-winning documentary film, The Journey of the Universe, which many of you have already seen. And once again, and it would embarrass him if I say it too much about it each day, but just a word of thanks again to Warren Martin for the Ellen and Warren Martin Lectureship for Emerging Studies in Bible and Theology. Once again, Warren, we thank you for your gift that makes this possible. So let us welcome our scholars. Thank you.
What did the Hindu mystic say to the hot dog vendor? There it is. It's an old joke. Make me one with everything. I've listened to all the talks so far, and I think every speaker without exception has used the word interconnectedness. And I think in many ways we are going to continue talking about interconnectedness. But I suppose a lot of the message we want to convey is that it's not so much a matter of becoming one with everything, but realizing that we are already one with everything. Before I turn to the remarks that I've prepared for this afternoon, I want to add my voice of thanks to those who have brought us and me to the Chautauqua Institute. I was here 30 years ago, and it's delightful to be back, and delightful to be back as a participant in this series. So I want to thank the Department of Religion, specifically Joan and Maureen, for inviting me to participate in this series, as well as my old friends Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm for including me in yet another wonderful gathering that they have organized. And I also want to add my voice of thanks to Mr. Martin for making this all possible. Becoming the heart of the universe. Our human destiny is to become the heart of the universe that embraces the whole of the Earth community. So write Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker in their recent book, Journey of the Universe. This sounds good to me and certainly ignites my imagination. For me, it speaks of ontology, that is, a consideration of existence and reality. It also speaks of ethics and aesthetics, or a consideration of care and joy. But how might this statement relate to perspectives found within Asian religious traditions? More specifically, what affinities can be found between it and other claims made in Journey of the Universe and significant aspects of the Hindu religious traditions of India? I propose to answer this question by exploring some Hindu notions about the ultimate nature of reality and self, about self-realization, and about divine relationships and the experience of supreme love. The story that is being told by many scientists today and recorded in narratives form and in books and films like Journey of the Universe can be regarded as a creation myth. Creation myths convey an existential message as they relate how the world came into being, delineate the ultimate nature of reality, and identify who we are as well as our place and destiny in the world. The picture of reality being expressed by scientists such as astrophysicists and evolutionary biologists today is much too complex to convey within our limited time. But one essential feature is that everything is interrelated. The universe we inhabit is simultaneously diverse and unified. It is a multiform universe. It displays radical singularity as well as radical diversity. Furthermore, its nature is emergent. In simple terms, this means that nothing came into this universe from somewhere else. Rather, everything came out of the universe like waves emerge from the ocean. The unfolding universe then is deeply creative and fundamentally interconnected, and the consequences of this are profound. Turning to a consideration of some facets of Hinduism, I begin by introducing another creation myth, this one from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the oldest, longest, and most influential of the foundational Upanishadic texts of early Hindu thought. In the beginning, there was the One, frequently called Brahman. Trouble is that this One was lonely and bored and experienced no joy. It's not much fun playing only with yourself. So the One desired another, and from this intense longing split itself into a male and female, the primordial divine couple. The two then proceeded to make love, and from this passionately productive act, the immense multiplicity of all things and beings came into existence. Importantly, this process continues as the creative divine love play goes on endlessly. The one undifferentiated reality becomes infinitely differentiated in terms of name and form as incalculable beings manifest as and in the world. The universe then is both the embodied result of the love play of the divine couple as well as the playground to experience further intimate interaction. For our purposes, however, the account of creation expressed in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad gives voice to the simultaneity of radical unity and diversity. At the unmanifest level, reality is unified, whereas at the manifest level, it is manifold. An effective way of approaching an understanding of this conception of reality is to think about the double meaning of the simple phrase, nothing ever remains the same. All manifest things are transitory. The phenomenal world we experience with our senses is distinct, diverse, and continuously changing. Nothing ever remains the same. But what is it that ever remains the same? It is nothingness itself, that void-like, unmanifest dimension of reality that is both constant and singular, Nothing ever remains the same. Is this what physicists are telling us with the first law of thermodynamics? Though matter all comes from the same source, it is shape-shifting and in perpetual flux. Energy, on the other hand, is constant. It can be transformed from one form to another, but can neither be created nor destroyed. The implications of this are far-reaching. This means that the apparent world we ordinarily assume to be comprised of separate things and beings is, from another perspective, radically interconnected and unified. In its simplest terms, the Upanishads teach it's all one. This, too, is a point expressed in so many of the stories about origins coming from the science of our day. We are beings of a universe, not a multiverse. And perhaps Brian Greene is right that there are multiverses, but the point is that we live in a universe. Beneath the apparent diversity lurks a singularity, whether this be the undivided kernel at the core of the cosmic Big Bang that spewed forth our universe, or the supernova explosion that gave birth to our entire solar system, or the single cell that multiplied into the diverse biosphere of Earth. Contemporary science is telling a story of radical unity within a seemingly distinct reality. This, too, is a major thrust of much Hindu religious philosophy. Everything is interconnected, and the implications are particularly considerable with regard to conceptions of the self. A fundamental question that has been asked again and again throughout most of the recorded history of our species is, who am I? This is a deeply religious question that is answered explicitly in religious traditions like Hinduism, and I would contend implicitly in much contemporary scientific discovery. We often take in scientific information about the universe as knowledge about the world out there. But this violates the very scientific principle that the nature of reality is unified. There is no out there out there. We are part of the whole show. As Swim and Tucker say in Journey of the Universe, we are the universe in the form of a human. What if we were to regard the story of the universe as our own biography and listen to it with the same intense interest as we would a story about our childhood told by an elder relative? It is a story about us, about ourself in the largest sense of this term. If everything is interconnected, then we are ultimately non-different from everything else. And this is exactly what a text like the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad claims. This self is Brahman, the supreme unified reality. It is the whole. As all the spokes are fastened to the hub and rim of a wheel, so to oneself are fastened all beings, all gods, all worlds, all breaths, and all selves. Or stated perhaps more simply, again from this text, the self within all is the self of yours. In short, the self shares an essence with all other beings, as it is non-different from the totality of reality. What might life be like lived from this perspective? As one of the stated religious goals of Hinduism is self-realization, which is accomplished by a shift in identity from the illusory, egotistic, separate self to the larger self that is interconnected with all beings. If a man knows I am Brahman, that supreme interconnected reality, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad states, he becomes this whole world. Self-realization involves the profound recognition that we are non-different from everything. Inspired by this understanding through his contact with the Upanishadic ideals of Mahatma Gandhi, the Norwegian philosopher and founder of deep ecology, Arne Naess, wrote, "We underestimate ourselves. I emphasize self. We tend to confuse it with the narrow ego. Human nature is such that with sufficient all-sighted maturity, we cannot avoid identifying ourselves with all living beings." The ethical life for both Gandhi and Nas does not depend upon dutiful moral sacrifice, but rather on one's capacity for empathetically identifying with other beings. Violence towards other beings rests on seeing them as radically other. The ethical life from a Hindu perspective therefore involves the cultivation of our insight into the true nature of reality and self. Issues pertaining to equality and justice are all rooted in the non-dual vision of the Upanishads for Gandhi, who proclaimed, "I believe in Advaita, non-duality. I believe in the essential unity of man and, for that matter, of all that lives. The rock-bottom foundation of the technique for achieving the power of nonviolence is the belief in the essential oneness of all life." This Upanishadic notion of self led Gandhi to his lifelong commitment to all-inclusive love. He maintained that many of the problems we face today, especially those related to social injustice and environmental crises, have a great deal to do with our sense of self. "My religion," writes Gandhi, "embraces all life. I want to realize brotherhood or identity not merely with beings called human, but I want to realize identity with all life, even with such things as crawl upon the earth. I want, if I don't give you a shock, to realize identity with even the crawling things upon earth, because we claim descent from the same God, and that being so, all life in whatever form it appears must be essentially one." Following Gandhi, Arni Nass linked his thinking on the true nature of the self to the Bhagavad Gita, or more specifically to verse 629, which says, "The yogi sees all beings with an equal eye. He sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self." Here are the roots of what were to become two of the major pillars of Nass's deep ecology: the concept of the ecological self, that interrelated self, and biological egalitarianism. At the level of practical ethics, self-realization, the process of identifying with all beings, involves recognizing the interests of others as one's own. Identifying with wider systems of nature leads to the realization that environmental destruction is tantamount to self-destruction. Nass asserts the requisite care flows naturally if the self is widened and deepened so that protection of nature is felt and conceived of as protection of ourselves. Here is an ethic that consists of an all-inclusive compassionate care that arises from insights radiating from both Hinduism and Journey of the Universe. But what about aesthetics? Consideration of this perspective takes us into further emotional realms and aspects of relationship. There is an intriguing and often misunderstood passage in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in which the great sage Yajnavalkya tells his beloved wife Maitreyi, "One holds a husband dear, you see, not out of love for the husband. Rather, it is out of love for oneself that one holds a husband dear. One holds a wife dear, you see, not out of love for the wife. Rather, it is out of love for oneself that one holds a wife dear." Although this statement might seem to render all love narcissistic, such an interpretation disappears once it is understood that the self the sage is referring to is the Atman, that infinite self that is non-different from the totality of reality. Ultimate love involves a deep understanding of the true nature of the beloved. We saw that in the beginning that there was just the one, who then split itself into innumerable forms. This means that everything is non-different from one's own self. The true essence of one's lover, and by extension, each and every being then, is ultimately identical with one's own true self. When we gaze in loving awe at some aspect of the universe, whether it be another human, or a tree, or a river, or a mountain, Swim and Tucker remind us in Journey of the Universe that we do so as beings in whom the universe shivers in wonder at itself. Wonder is the experience of joy that comes from profound love. Although it is a feature of the indivisible, the experience of love, the actual taste of love, requires differentiation. The old recipe for any love story insists that the lovers must be separated. The rest of the story, then, is about the intricate, yearning, burning, passionate path that leads the lovers back together. The story of the universe is a story of the one making love with itself in an infinite variety of forms. From a certain Hindu perspective, this is called Prem Vilas, the play of love, which consists of creative interaction and the formation of a great variety of connections and bonds, sambandh, to use the Sanskrit word. As Swim and Tucker proclaim in Journey of the Universe, quote, to commune may be one of the deepest tendencies in the universe. And what we long for is profound intimacy of relationship. The supreme fruit of the cosmic love play for those who know the way to play the game is ananda, or profound joy. What is the right way to play the game of life? Affinities between certain aspects of Hinduism and emerging narratives like Journey of the Universe seem to suggest that the answer is to be found in a deep understanding of the interconnected nature of reality and concomitant self as a springboard into a compassionately caring and immensely joyful, all-inclusive love. A passionate engagement with the entire magical world that lies before us. Is it possible to love not only another human being, or even a cute mammal like a baby seal or elephant, but all creatures, and even natural phenomena like trees, rivers, and mountains? Visions that arise from consideration of both Hinduism and Journey of the Universe suggest that the answer to this question is a big, resounding yes, as both seem to agree that we are non-different from the totality of reality. So I close by returning to where we begin. Our human destiny is to become the heart of the universe that embraces the whole. Thank you.
Good afternoon. A universe that is expanding and contracting, humans as participants in the cosmic process, sentience across the spectrum of living things, interdependent communities, a critical perspective on symbolic consciousness, and a valuing of compassion and wisdom. Much of the vision presented in the Journey of the Universe resonates with Buddhism. At the risk of oversimplification, we might say that scientists have discovered certain features of reality around us at the macrocosmic level that Buddhists have discovered within us at the microcosmic level. As a scholar of Buddhism, when I first watched Journey of the Universe, I was struck by the point made early on about how the story of the universe is plotted as a process of expansion and contraction. The universe spreads out from the Big Bang, and energy extends outward from the nuclear fusion happening in the sun, while gravity pulls galaxies into black holes, and at some point gravity will cause the sun to implode in a death spiral and then explode outward as a supernova. Brian Swim's comments about this pattern reminded me of how one Japanese Zen master, Sasaki Joshu Roshi, talks about the act of meditation as a process of contraction as we breathe in and expansion as we breathe out. Like many things in Zen, I can't say with any confidence that I know what exactly Sasaki's getting at, but it does seem to relate to additional comments that Swim makes in the film about how we are all embedded participants in the universe and members of interdependent communities. Let me explain. As you may know, in Buddhism, we hear a lot of talk about the core doctrine of dependent arising, which is the English translation of a term that also gets rendered as interdependence, interbeing, or as I prefer it, interrelational arising. Simply put, this is the idea that I affect everything else and everything else affects me. In terms of meditation, we can imagine inhalation as the taking in of the world around ourselves and exhalation as our influencing the world in a vast process of interaction. Along these lines, through meditation and other practices, Buddhism tries to foster the realization that I am constituted by and continually changed by all sorts of inputs and influences, by my relationships with other things, as opposed to existing originally and fundamentally as a permanent, separate soul that secondarily enters into relationships with other things. Sometimes I try to express this concept to my students by highlighting that although I might say, I was born into this universe in 1954, and I've been doing my thing here in this world ever since, Buddhism would claim that it is more accurate to say, since 1954, the universe has been doing its thing through me, or better yet, as me. I see hints of this Buddhist concept in such comments in the film as stars are our ancestors, and I quote, the body of the universe gave birth to our body. This idea of interrelational arising gets expressed in Buddhism through the metaphor of water and waves. Insofar as we are constituted by and embedded in a larger process of interrelationship, each of us is like a wave on the surface of a great ocean. Just as a wave is a temporary configuration of water, as one facet of an ocean from which it is inseparable, each one of us is a temporary configuration of energy as one facet of a vast field of energy. In this worldview, reality is 100% unified and 100% diverse at one and the same time. And as the classic line from a major Buddhist scripture, the Heart Sutra, puts it, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Unfortunately, however, we usually only identify with our particular form as a wave and hence fail to recognize our embeddedness in something larger. Perhaps what Swim refers to in the film as our urge to merge is a yearning deep within all of us to experience fully the whole of which we are part, and in that way overcome the alienation we often feel when we live our lives only as a fearful ego, building castle walls around ourselves. According to Buddhism, we can realize at a deep level that we and all other things exist in what the film refers to as interdependent communities, and that this world, this universe, is not mechanistic, but organismic, not a static state of affairs, but a process filled, as the film points out, with living and dying. One question that Buddhism helps us answer is why we are stuck in our attachments behind the walls of the ego, why we usually experience things as a separate wave and fail to realize the underlying water, the larger whole of which we are part. One Buddhist diagnosis is that we succumb to what the tradition calls the three poisons, three detrimental mental states: greed, ill will, and ignorance. Greed in the sense of craving things we don't have and clinging to things that we do have, things that we think will give us permanent security. Ill will is the flip side of the greed. It is our anger toward whatever threatens the objects of our emotional attachment and, by extension, our false sense of security. I think we've all experienced this push-pull form of reactivity. At least I have. And as an interlude, since David told a joke, I'm going to tell the other kind of stock joke some of you may know. Did you hear about the Buddhist vacuum cleaner? It's the vacuum cleaner with no attachments. As my students would say, I know it's a lame joke, but that's all I have to offer, I'm sorry. The third poison, ignorance, is ignorance of impermanence, our failure to recognize the fact that everything is changing, that nothing has an eternal soul or separate unchanging core, or, in positive terms, the fact that we are all profoundly connected to and shaped by the world around us as it unfolds in its process, both grand and glorious, and at times painful and unjust. In ignorance, we fail to realize the fact that, as Brian Swim puts it in the film, we are participants in a vast system that is like a living cell. In East Asia, the Zen tradition augments this analysis by looking at symbolic consciousness as a mixed bag. The Journey of the Universe highlights how symbolic consciousness distinguishes humans from other animals, how, and I quote again, language opens up new depths of consciousness, how humans are even able to concentrate consciousness on consciousness. Zen recognizes the unique power and possibilities that symbolic consciousness brings to us, while at the same time arguing that this consciousness contributes to our entrapment in the ego and alienation from the world. That is to say, such symbols as names or labels contribute to our dividing of the world into me and you, subject and object, us and them, myself and the world out there. Our nouns may make things seem more autonomous and substantial, enduring, than they really are, and the adjectives we use in our judgments may exacerbate our entanglement in greed and ill will. Symbolic consciousness may even lead us to do what the film mentions Descartes did, to view animals as mere objects, as machines that cannot feel pain. It may also lead us to assume, like Descartes did, that individual rational thought is the most fundamental reality, on the basis of which we are led to say, I think, therefore I am. This assumption then leads us to conclude that as this thinking entity, I exist separately from anything about which I might think. This is the advent of the entanglement in dualistic modes of experiencing that Zen and other forms of Buddhism criticize as a major cause of suffering. Buddhism prods us to extricate ourselves from entrapment in dualistic modes of experience and to free ourselves from the three poisons by cultivating their opposites: generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. In key respects, this cultivation revolves around self-restraint, nonviolence, simple living, contentment, and other virtues that carry ecological weight and help us, as I sometimes put it, rethink rich. In this process of self-cultivation, we are said to gain wisdom and compassion, and in this respect, Buddhism finds further affinity with the journey of the universe. In addition to its reference to the urge to merge, I love that expression, the film mentions how the experience of suffering and death leads to interdependent communities, how the individual self nourishes the community, and how, in the course of evolution, mother animals started protecting their young from predators and then later started nurturing them as acts of care and compassion. Zen claims that compassion arises through a kind of spiritual death, when we extricate ourselves from the egocentricity that looks fearfully out at the world as something apart from itself. In other words, to break beyond the normal sense of self and realize oneself as thoroughly interconnected with the world is to expand one's sense of self, to identify with the world, to feel the pain of others as if it were one's own pain. As Brian Swim rightly points out, this deepening of compassion can lead religions to celebrate the divine feminine, which, in the case of Buddhism, takes such forms as Tara in Tibet, Guanyin in China, and Kannon in Japan. In lifting up exemplars of compassion, however, Buddhism is more apt to speak of bodhisattvas than of goddesses. As you may know, a bodhisattva is seen by Mahayana Buddhists as a person who stays in the cycle of rebirth and re-death to help others, rather than attaining full nirvana and thereby leaving that cycle. Iconographically, and you may have seen this, the idea that these compassionate saints reach out to all people, lend them a helping hand in various ways, is represented by painting or sculpting these figures with multiple arms and hands. The creators of these images also champion the other main virtue of bodhisattvas, wisdom, in some cases by putting eyes in the palms of each of those hands, or giving the figures multiple heads. As the antidote to ignorance, Buddhist wisdom is, among other things, a penetrating insight into the ongoing process of interrelational arising. Here, too, we find congruence with the journey of the universe. Toward the end of the film, Swim talks about, and again I quote, a deep wisdom that might help us align our consciousness with the grain of cosmic evolution. And he also asks provocatively, what if our ultimate destiny is to experience the universe so deeply we come to realize that we are, in some sense, the mind and heart of the universe? As I mentioned earlier, in key respects, Buddhist meditation serves to cultivate an awareness that we are indeed profoundly embedded in the universe, that we are the product of a vast array of conditioning factors coming together and getting organized as our mind and body. In effect, as the film implies, the universe is coming to consciousness in and through us. Along these lines, Buddhist environmentalist John Seed down in Australia once declared, I am that part of the rainforest recently emerged into thinking. As a further point of congruence, many Buddhists would argue that, as the film puts it, wonder will guide us. When we stop seeing reality through the tinted lens of the ego, with all of its attachments and reactions, we can see the universe more openly, clearly, freshly, not in terms of how we might control it, change it, or use it. Hence, Zen Buddhists talk about seeing things in their suchness, or just as they are. They would further claim that this type of seeing is crucial to discerning and appreciating the beauty of the universe. And some environmental thinkers, as you may know, have made the case that, as Buddhism scholar David Barnhill says, our moral love and respect for nature is based on an aesthetic appreciation of the beauty and value of the land. Or as Theravada Buddhist ethicist Padmasiri de Silva has written, it is the aesthetic dimension that reinforces our move toward conservation. Further exploration of this connection between aesthetic appreciation and environmental ethics, or as Plato might term it, beauty and the good, will need to wait for another occasion. While watching the journey of the universe, I also found myself thinking about several areas in which Buddhism may not be fully congruent with the vision laid out in the film. Historically, Buddhism has had an ambivalent view of the natural world, all rhetoric of the Japanese Zen love of nature notwithstanding. We can also find voices in the tradition warning us that the appreciation of beauty can easily lead to attachment. Such possible points of tension, however, do not detract from what I said at the outset. The story of the universe that is laid out so beautifully, eloquently, and effectively in the film accords with core doctrines of Buddhism, many of which were formulated not through astrophysicists gazing outward across the cosmos, but by meditators gazing inward across the wild reaches of the mind. In closing, I would argue that meditative or contemplative practices in various religious traditions, not just Buddhism, can help us foster the emerging vision sketched by the film. That is to say, contemplative practices across traditions can help us transform our way of looking at things, can help us realize at a deep level, not just in our heads, that we are, as Brian Swim puts it, participants in a vast system. In this way, we can cultivate not only a new story, but a new way of looking at things. Strictly speaking, this may actually be the recovery of an old way of looking at things, or a way of looking that has gotten hidden under layers of socialization and education. Of course, given the environmental challenges we're facing on this planet, a shift in perspective is not enough. A transformation of values and the performance of actions to reshape our economic and political structures are necessary as well. And here, too, our religious and educational systems, and I might add, places like Chautauqua, have a key role to play. Thank you.
I'd like you to take a deep breath and turn your face to the right. And take another exhale and then a deep breath and turn your neck the other way. And then move it so that you'll have to figure out who's going to look at whom, but look at someone next to you. And for some of you, it will be kin, and for others of you, might be a stranger, but guess what? We're all related. Okay, that's the first message that I'd like us to reflect on from Story of the Universe. For the second, I'd like you all to stand up and call out the direction that you face. South. And call out the names of 3 great trees, 3 great species of trees that you see to our south. Okay, there's an oak tree, there's a maple tree, there's a beech tree, there's so much. And now you can sit down, please. Crows soar into the sky, conferring with one another, conspiring as they intimidate other birds. You all know this. Dolphins by the tens of thousands congregate, communicating with one another, delighting their human cousins. Elephants mourn the loss of their dead and fall into depression when suppressed by captivity, deprived of their natural broad foraging forays. How much so for human beings, herded into social networks, into built environments defined by concrete and advertisements. Where can we as humans find a place? And you all have found a place here, yet you all bring suffering into this place, leave refreshed, and take up that life that we live outside of utopia. At the end of the film, Journey of the Universe, we catch reminders, glimpses of the havoc wrought upon entire ecosystems by industrialization. The tar sands of Alberta are poised to destroy an area the size of Florida. The extreme weather events of Hurricane Katrina, Tropical Storm Sandy, and the Oklahoma tornadoes show no signs of abating. However, the same will that drove people in a misguided attempt to create a heaven on earth by the manipulation of the material realm can also result in a turnaround. Perhaps a gradual reversal of the trend upwards to that threshold of 400 carbon dioxide parts per million. Nietzsche writes, "Do not let them fly away from earthly beings and beat their wings against eternal walls. Alas, there has been so much virtue that has flown away. Lead back to the earth the virtue that flew away, back to the body, back to life, that it may give the earth a meaning, a human meaning." This brings us to consider, what is the definition of life, of the living? What does it mean to be alive? Jainism, stretching back 2,800 years, describes a universal journey of emplacement of myriad souls within a narrative of ascent. Life, according to Jain philosophy and practice, takes multiple forms. Elemental, life in the very waters of Chautauqua Lake. Life in the concrete beneath us. Life in the microbes. Life in simple organisms, increasingly hierarchically complex. By studying Jainism's core principles and practices, we discover a compelling ethical cosmography, a chart of the cosmos, wherein the very presence of the earth itself commands a need for care and protection. Exactly 1 year ago, I traveled with a group of students and other professors to the rural village of Hastinapur, northeast of Delhi. 3 founding teachers, or Tirthankaras of Jainism, were born in Hastinapur. And we moved through the village into the area of Jain religious sites constructed by the Jain community under the able leadership of Sri Mataji, a Digambara Jain nun. We were greeted with an altered landscape of monumental architecture. And I'd like you to repeat after me. First, horizontal, vertical, and circular. As we entered into something not dissimilar from our graphic relief of Palestine down by the lake, we were reminded of the complex composition of the place we call Earth, Jambudvipa. Marble houses and flowing streams separated by wrought iron gates remind us of and inscribed with the names of the elements of earth, water, fire, air, the microbes, the nagoda, the various animals, plants, and of course, human beings. According to Jain philosophy, round and around, the soul arises from its elemental forms into microbial forms, into plant forms, into animal forms, into human forms. And if humans mess up, and guess which gender messes up the worst? Males. Only males are qualified because of their sins to descend to the deepest of hells. But those who do well, where may they ascend? To a whole realm of different heavens, and this particular walk through temple reminds us of all of that. And it reminds us with this beautiful pillar right in the center, not unlike the lofty feelings that we experience as we look at these beautiful, I guess they're not Corinthian, they're Doric perhaps, columns, that there's something of an idea that we can rise to our better self, symbolized there by a single pillar. And the idea of Jainism is that if you get it right, and I'll explain some of the ways to get it right, that you can ascend in your own individual, particular soul to an undying state of energy, consciousness, and undying bliss. Now, across the way, we traversed to yet a different temple. The first was horizontal, low to the earth with a single pillar. The second, a vertical temple in the shape of the human figure. 10 stories high, clad with glass. At the base, when one enters, one finds representations of microbes and dirt. Climbing 7 floors of cramped staircases, one rises up through the various hells, a little bit like those scary places where the evangelicals like to bring kids to remind them of where they're going to end up if they do bad things, right? So you get to go through all of those things, 7 floors of them, where people are reminded where they will suffer due to various and specific heinous sins and crimes. Then at the level of Jambudvipa, at the level of what is horizontally presented out below, we get a miniaturized version of what it's like to be on Earth. The continents, the rivers, the mountains, humans, animals, etc. And then you start an ascent of 9 more staircases. through multiple stages of heaven, seeing the joys and the pleasures experienced by myriad gods and goddesses. Finally, one reaches the very top, an observation deck from which one, having arrived at the top of Mount Meru. And the great thing about the soteriology of Jainism is that every individual gets his or her mountaintop, your own private mountaintop. And from there, you can survey the vast, life-filled plains of India in a moment of exhilaration. So, horizontal, vertical. After alighting once again on terra firma, we wandered through the streets of Hastinapur, paying homage to the 24 Tirthankaras in temple after temple, each ornately designed in its own style. This is really the Jain Chautauqua, and they do the visual a little bit more dramatically than Protestants do. Let's just say that. Okay, on the horizon, we were drawn to an amazing stupa-like form, more circular than vertical, yet rising several stories above the bustle of the village. One enters through a simple portal. The architecture guides the pilgrim to the left, up a circular ramp, into a tunnel of darkness. Every 100 feet or so, a small portal of light allows light to filter into the passageway. And if you peer through the aperture there, you can barely make out the image of a central pillar rising through the darkness up 7 stories. Step after step, round after round, not unlike the Guggenheim Museum in New York, one ascends, the light increasing as one reaches the top after what feels as if it must be 7 circumambulations. Finally, one breaks open into the light and enters the final abode, symbolic of the release upward of Mount Meru, of your own personal ascent. In this rooftop open-air temple, one finds gleaming images of the 24 Tirthankaras and numerous images of the liberated, unnamed souls called siddhas. And the light from this lofty perch filters down over the enclosed central pillar. After rejoicing in silence at the exquisite rendering of these beings that have reached the perfection of total freedom, one can then walk around the plaza that surrounds the temple, gazing outward rather than inward, feeling again the delight of being a watcher rather than a doer. According to Jainism, the cosmos takes the shape of the human body. The human body takes the shape of the cosmos in an interplay of microphase and macrophase. The lower realms of the body, burdened with 148 identifiable karmas, hold the soul tightly within samsara. The middle realms of the body, a place of will and heat, allow for purification and the taking up of the vows that dispel violence. That is, the vows of nonviolence, truthfulness, not stealing, sexual restraint, and non-possession. The upper realms of the body provide the clarity of heaven-like experiences, and we've all had them. We're here. Purified senses and a calm mind can erase lifetimes of stress and karma. Like the world's largest sculpture carved from a single block of stone, created by the Jains, one can stand like the Jain king Bahubali, freed from all troubles, countenance serene, liberated from all karmas. The faults of karma bind a soul, the Jain practices of yoga, and you just did one by standing up. That's a Jain practice. It's just simply stand there, and the karmas evaporate off your body. So this brings us to the title of the talk, Ethical Cosmography. In the discussion of Journey of the Universe, We explored a sense briefly of how a story of evolution can prompt or inspire an ethical response within the human. Like, oh, maybe I should become a vegetarian, it's better for the world, or maybe I should really get a different automobile. Now let's think about this in terms of Jainism. Jainism, I asked you all to look at the tree. And today we don't quite think this way because our manufacturing has been transplanted from trees to petroleum. But what Mahavira, the 24th Tirthankara, told his monks and nuns was, when you look at a tree, regard it for its beauty, not for the implements the tree can produce, such as buckets, boats, houses, furniture, and firewood. Being untruthful in speech or hypocritical in behavior deepens the wounds carried in daily life. Stealing from another person or stealing from any living beings, which in Jainism includes the earth bodies through mining, the water bodies we steal when we use bottled water, the fire bodies we steal from the element of fire as we burn petroleum, and air bodies, we're suffocating our own air. And animals, billions killed each year for food. All of these karmic activities cause stress and distress. Disrespect for sexuality leads to emotional stress and infertility and disease. Clinging to worldly things causes hoarding, protecting, and misappropriated ideas of personhood based on material acquisitions. Jainism suggests that by surveying our inner landscape and recognizing it as inseparable from the outer landscape can heighten an individual's sense of connectivity and responsibility. Feeling intimacy with life in its many forms, from microbial to heavenly, can prove instructive and creative. We must learn to live within the confines of sustainability, learning to do with less, following the example, perhaps, of Jain monks and nuns who find happiness within rather than in acquisitions and accretions. Now, Jainism tells a very different story of the universe than we have in science. There was no great flaring forth. The sun is not a collection of hot gases, but houses a splendid temple with a pristine image of the Jinnah. The moon, in their cosmology, is further away than the sun. And the earth is the center of the universe, and the human is at the center of the earth. This is not the story of the universe as we've heard it. The Jain story conflicts with the scientific narratives in myriad ways, yet both the universe story and the Jain narrative agree on one principle. We must recover intimacy to find our fullness. And from a healthy distance, we can gain and share a new perspective that emphasizes responsibility rather than greed. Thank you.
We have today about 15 minutes for questions, and I do have to tell you ahead of time, we have another program that comes in here about 3:30, so we do have to be a little bit more careful of the time. So you know by now, go to each microphone. Today we have 3 microphones so that all our speakers can stand at the same time. It would be helpful if your questions were directed just to one of the speakers instead of to all of them, because that will give us more variety in the answers. All right, do we have a question?
Yes. I'll direct this to Professor Ives. I guess primarily because it deals with a dualism. Just as science is showing us the minuteness of the earth in respect to the entire universe, it is also showing us that humans in their collectiveness can alter this planet. And is there anything in Buddhism that can give us wisdom as to how to handle this dualism.
And again, so that's a dualism between seeing the universe in its large scale size and the small size, and at the same time humans hurting the environment, hurting the world. Yeah, it's interesting to think about, what kind of dualism would that be? I think what you're saying is sort of enhanced vision on the one hand and appreciation of the universe at different levels, and then human destructiveness at the other, if I follow you correctly. I think, in many ways what Buddhism offers, as I was saying earlier, is an ethic of restraint. And obviously we need more than that, as I was saying. I think we need political action. We need to rethink economic structures and power in our society and around the world. But at the very least, I think what Buddhism can offer is a way of rethinking rich, a way of thinking about fulfillment that isn't about having but being, isn't about acquisition but a kind of letting go, is about a kind of simplicity once our basic needs have been met. And that gets us into issues of distributive justice, letting go, sharing, that I think a lot of other religions have a lot of commonality with. So if I understood your question, that's my stab at it. If I missed it, maybe we can talk afterwards.
That's close. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank everyone for speaking so profoundly. I'm terrible with names, but I want to ask a question of the person who spoke for Hinduism. So you repeated the metaphor that I think is used in the film of the heart of the universe, of human beings being the heart of the universe. And I find that a really inspiring metaphor. At the same time, I don't know exactly what it means. So I'm curious to hear you say more on what you mean by that.
Well, thank you for that question. It's a big question in many ways. I think there's many ways of approaching and thinking about it, but I suppose I would just focus on consciousness and what is consciousness. And being heart, I think there's two aspects for me in the notion of becoming the heart of the universe and embracing all beings through that. One is more or less a cognitive aspect, what I was calling an ontology, which has to do with understanding how it is through consciousness that we are connected with everything. That in some sense, I think both Journey of the Universe and many of the aspects of Hinduism question our assumption that consciousness is only available to humans. So I think both narratives suggest that consciousness is much, much more pervasive than that. So I think it's that cognitive dimension that is important, because the heart, and it's interesting, in Sanskrit, the same term, and there's a variety, but manas, for example, can mean both heart and mind. So I think there's that dimension to becoming the heart of the universe so that we can embrace the whole. But the other aspect is the effectual side, and that is opening up our being into a relationship with that with which we are connected, and that leads into the more effectual, relational dimension of becoming the heart of the universe, I guess, as I would see it from both of these narratives. And that's, I think, what I was getting at with the concept of all-inclusive love. So there's a cognitive dimension that gets us to all-inclusive love, as well as that effectual, relational, opening our hearts to being in relationship with the other that gets us there.
So do you mean by that? That sounds like you said that human beings are the heart of the universe, but at the same time that the film and Hinduism points out that we are not the only ones that have that consciousness. So do you mean that human beings are the heart of the universe, or human beings should realize that we are also a heart of the universe among all other living beings?
Again, a great question. My own answer to that would have to be the all-inclusive one.
Okay.
And that is that, but I'm speaking to humans. These are human stories, human narratives. They're written by humans for humans. The trees out here might be telling a different story. I'm not one to really question what that really means from a tree perspective. I suppose, encouraging humans to take that role of being the heart of the universe, I by no means want to make that exclusive and suggest that there aren't other players in the game. Because that idea of the self that I was teasing out of Journey of the Universe, as well as drawing out of Hindu literature, seems to suggest that, again, it's all interconnected, and therefore consciousness, if I want to come back to that term, is pervasive, so that we can't make an exclusive claim to such things. Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's a big heart.
Thank you.
So the term as we intended it, David answered the question beautifully. So that term, mind and heart of the universe, which is in the book and the film, comes from the Confucian tradition, one of the great traditions which we'll talk about tomorrow. But that tradition is saying, along the lines of what David just said, we are the conscious self-reflection of the universe, but we're also suggesting there's consciousness differentiated in this process in the animal world, the plant world, and so on. We talked about this the other day, sentience that's differentiated. But the Chinese, and this is what I think is so powerful about this term, the Chinese character for mind and heart is one character. So sometimes the Japanese will be saying, I've been thinking about this. So, we have this kind of rational split in some of our Western philosophical traditions. This is precisely to overcome that. And the idea is that human conscious heart affects everything else, as you've all beautifully said, in the microphase, macrophase relationship and that interrelationship. And when the Chinese students last March in about 7 universities saw this film, they recognized their tradition there as well. And that's exactly what we're trying to say, that this is an offering that complements and maybe can be in deeper dialogue with these other traditions around the planet. And I must say, this is the first time we've done this, you see, and so we're all doing this together at this point in time.
So I too am really terrible with names, but first, thank you. This is directed to the man who was speaking about Jainism. So the question I have, so Hinduism and Buddhism have both, I'm familiar with both of them because I find them here in the culture and I've asked about it. Jainism, I think that I know a whole lot less about and would like to know a whole lot more about. So one of my easy questions is where is the largest part of this population? You're describing this area of India, but what sort of numbers, when you're speaking about people who practice Jainism, clearly you're here as a representative of a major religion or a large religion. So the first question is about how many people, and the second is, do you have some suggestions of where I might look or read, other than send you an email saying, please, tell me everything you know?
Okay, Jainism is probably between 4 and 8 million. The reason we don't really know for sure is because they took the advice of the Buddhists and they don't necessarily want to put their identity forward all the time. They're mainly in Western India. We associate them largely with the state of Gujarat, but there are millions also in Rajasthan, all throughout northern India, as well as Karnataka in the south. They had a big problem with the famine in 300 BC. They migrated south. They lost touch with one community to the other. They lost some of their books. So there's 2 different forms of Jainism, one called the Svetambara, and all of their monks and their nuns wear white clothing. And for the Digambaras, they are rather famous for their male monks taking up the practice of nudity as the fullest expression of the renunciation of all possessions. The best place to learn more about Jainism, there's really 3. One is a book by Jeffrey Long called The Jains. Another is just a beautiful book called The Jain Path of Purification by Padmanabh Jaini, professor at Berkeley, emeritus. And then another called The Jains by Paul Dundas, a professor at Edinburgh. And then I have a little book called Nonviolence to Animals, Earth, and Self in Asian Traditions, which is a narrative partly of how my interest in nonviolence and ahimsa, in the Gandhi that you heard of spoken so eloquently by Professor Haberman, the influence of Jainism or Jainism upon Mahatma Gandhi and the contemporary implications of truly living a Jain ethic. So I traveled to various Jain communities throughout India and learned as much as I could and put it forward in a book called Nonviolence to Animals and Animals, Earth, and Self in Asian Traditions. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentations. Essentially, this could go for any of you, but I guess, well, let me ask the question first. Given that all three are dharmic religions and karma plays a big role in both, how might karma fit into the environmental crisis? I'm asking that broadly, just to, maybe you've heard Christopher Ives, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, different Buddhist traditions interpret the doctrine differently, and I can just speak to Japan, which I know fairly well, and also North American Buddhism. A lot of people work with karma to basically try to articulate a Buddhist theory of responsibility. You know, if you take interrelational arising and the idea that everything you do has a ripple effect and does have, you know, in terms of karma being cause and effect, that a recognition of this principle leads to a greater degree of mindfulness about what we do, responsibility for what we do. But like a lot of traditions, a lot of these are concepts that are ethically malleable. I mean, just like we have the 10 Commandments and thou shalt not kill, does that mean radical pacifism? What about the death penalty? What about police use of force? In some cases, you know, the Catholics have a just war theory to try to figure out when state violence might be acceptable. Some of these doctrines, you know, like interrelational arising, a lot of times when Western Buddhists look at that, they think about it in terms of karma. Oh, I affect the world around me. I should be very mindful about my choices in the supermarket or buying a car or whatever. In Japan, rather than thinking about my impact on the world out there, it's often interpreted the opposite way, thinking about all the things that one receives from the world around oneself. And with that Japanese cultural spin on the doctrine, it ends up being much more of a theory of indebtedness and gratitude. And you can see how each of these interpretations can play out differently in social ethics. But simply put, yeah, often karma is interpreted as a way to really get that, yeah, when I act, it's not in a vacuum. It is going to have effects, you know, in ways I can't even comprehend all around me.
All right, thank you so very much. I hope that you were as we had one more question. I'm sorry. We have to do it quickly.
Very quickly. I just wonder if each speaker could, for 10 seconds, talk about the books on your traditions and ecology that came out of the Harvard series on religion and ecology.
You know.
Okay, I'm editor of the volume Jainism and Ecology, as well as co-editor of Hinduism and Ecology. We gathered in those volumes, including work by David Haberman, the wisdom of dozens of scholars from overseas as well as from North America and Europe and Asia to reflect on these issues in ways that you've heard a little bit today, but in far greater depth and detail.
I guess I've become most interested in what I would call worshipful interaction with embodied forms of divinity in the natural world. So that's a big mouthful of phrase. And in that line, I've just published a book called People Trees, which is an examination of the conception of trees in the context of tree shrines primarily in northern India. Before that, I have a book that is called River of Love in an Age of Pollution, where I look at religion and ecology issues surrounding the Yamuna River, one of the dominant rivers of northern India. And then I guess if I'd want to mention one other book, a book called Journey Through the 12 Forests, which is about interaction with a sacred storied land in north central India.
Yeah, and just briefly, the Buddhism volume, Buddhism and Ecology, that came out of that series of Harvard conferences, offers a good variety of perspectives on the issue. Today I was talking a little bit more in terms of Buddhist psychology, Buddhist views of reality. What that book also offers, there's plenty of treatment of that, but it also has essays that are looking, for example, at Thai monastic communities as a kind of paradigm for the sort of simple living I was talking about in my talk. Also, there are one or two essays that are really highlighting how there are ultimately many Buddhisms, plural, out there, and we really can't generalize about Buddhism, writ large. And so in that way, you get a look at how different Buddhisms maybe are stronger or weaker on certain issues when we think about coming up with for example, a Buddhist environmental ethic.
So Joan asked me to just say a few more words, and I'll just complement what Heather was asking about. As we've said, there's a whole project on religion and ecology, the Forum on Religion and Ecology. All of these have been important players and editors of these volumes on all the world's religions and indigenous religions. If you Google religion and ecology, you'll find that website. Our webmistress is here. You can sign up on that first page for more information about conferences, books, and on-the-ground projects. You look under Engage projects, there's lots of on-the-ground projects, including from the Asian traditions. As well, you've probably seen these, and many of you have gotten them, but just to reinforce, if you go to journeyoftheuniverse.org, or just Google Journey of the Universe, there's a lot of material there. You can find out how to buy the film, get the book through Yale Press, and there's a series of interviews that I did with scientists and environmentalists showing how this story has inspired their work on the ground to make a difference. Finally, there is a section under the book and conversations of curriculum, and there's the Science Done Simply, some questions, so you can use this for discussion. All these papers will be posted on the Journey of the Universe website, so you can read them in the comfort of your home. Thank you very much.